Hi, and welcome to The Point. I'm Brian Sterling, substituting today for Rick Albin. Gun violence, child exploitation, public corruption, and consumer fraud. Our guest this morning has been at the center of it all for more than 2 years. Mark Totten, he's the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Michigan. That covers half of the state's Lower Peninsula and all of the UP. Last week, Totten announced he was stepping down from his position, a common courtesy extended by all U.S. attorneys every 4 to 8 years when there's a change in administrations in Washington. The Kalamazoo native started his career at the Justice Department and then returned to the state where he taught criminal law for several years at MSU and then served as chief legal counsel for the governor. He became U.S. Attorney in 2022. In his 2.5 years, Totten has scored a number of convictions on a wide range of crimes and at least one high-profile public corruption case. We started our conversation with his initial thoughts as he closes this very active chapter of his career. Mark Totten, I imagine this must be a bittersweet moment for you, proud of the work that you've done, but probably still a lot left to do.
I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity I've had for nearly 3 years to serve in this position as U.S. Attorney. It's an extraordinary opportunity. On the one hand, it's a heavy responsibility. It's also very rewarding. You know, every single day I get to go to work with the mission of trying to protect the public and figuring out how can we do that quicker, better, stronger. And I'm just so grateful for the trust that was put in me to serve in this role for a few years.
You led a department of 45 attorneys in charge of 49 counties on the western side of the state, including the entire UP. I got to imagine that this wasn't a 9-to-5 job. This was probably pretty demanding.
You know, it is. I think, you know, we follow the court schedule often. You know, the bread and butter is the cases that we do, but you know, things can come up at any point. There's a lot to get done, and you know, I have the opportunity to get as much out of this as I put time into it, and when there's so much on the line and so many important things to do, I work some late nights.
Assess the level of violent crime in our communities. Is it getting better or getting worse?
So in 2021, going into 2022, which is about the time I started, we saw those numbers being the highest they'd been in probably 3 decades, going back to the mid-1990s. Coming out of the pandemic, there were a number of reasons. What's happened since is we've seen those numbers come down pretty significantly. That's not just here, that's really all across the United States. To be clear, we need to keep our feet to the gas. We need to keep working, but I think, you know, the work we've done in the office has been part of the solution. We have been laser focused on those who are driving gun violence, namely shooters and those engaged in illegal firearms trafficking. The vast majority of our violent crime cases, our firearms cases, fall in that category.
You know, at the end of the day, I think it's fair to think of safety as a civil right. Nobody should live their life in greater fear of violence in their house, on their street, in their neighborhoods because of the zip code that they live in. That's not right. And my team and I are committed to doing everything we can to keep people safe this summer.
You have been vocal about the proliferation of handguns and the serious repercussions that they can have, especially when it comes to children. I think a lot of people wonder, how as a society are we able to accept that level of violence? What happened here?
You know, I don't know that I have an explanation, but I will simply say we can never get used to what we're experiencing right now. Starting in 2021, for the first time ever, and it's still true today, the #1 cause of death for our youngest Americans, ages 0 through 19, became gun violence. Just in the few years I've been here, we've seen a 2-year-old that was shot and killed in Wyoming here because of a gun that was trafficked by a man named Gerald Martin, who we successfully prosecuted. We saw a young 2-year-old child also in Lansing who retrieved a gun that belonged to a defendant we prosecuted named Avis Coward. He shot and killed himself. These are 2-year-olds. We should never, ever get used to this type of violence and the impact it's having on our kids.
It would seem, though, that we are becoming a little bit desensitized to it all, because if you look at that stat, that's the #1 driver of the deaths of young children. This is hair on fire statistics.
Yeah, no, it's deeply concerning. I've tried to use every opportunity I can to try to get the message out, to let people see what the impact of gun violence has had on communities, on institutions, and certainly on our youngest Americans.
You were spearheading a couple of those Safe Summer initiatives that we saw over the last couple of years. What kind of success did those have?
So there's a couple things we're trying to do there. First of all is simply to send a message at the beginning of the summer to people who might be engaging in risky behavior, that we are on the beat, that we're watching, and that they may very well face federal instead of state charges and the significantly heavier penalties that often come with that. It's difficult to measure that. You know, it's hard to know what didn't happen, but we do think that getting that message out was effective and that's important. We also prosecuted cases that came out of it, namely any case that involved a crime gun, a gun that had been previously used in the commission of a crime. Each summer we prosecuted a number of these cases, many of them cases we probably would not have otherwise prosecuted, but that was part of the promise we made.
You also, I think, introduced a lot of West Michigan to Glock switches. Folks didn't even know that these things existed until law enforcement pointing out the problem with them.
At the heart of this action is a conspiracy to illegally traffic firearms and firearm conversion devices. These devices go by many names. The name I will use today, what they're often referred to, is switches. 7 defendants face charges related to the possession and the transfer of these devices. Once installed, a switch can transform an ordinary semi-automatic pistol into a fully automatic machine gun. A switch can be installed in less than a minute and with little technical knowledge. Once installed, these devices can enable a semi-automatic pistol to fire over 1,000 rounds in a minute with a single pull of a trigger.
When I started in 2022, I asked every police chief that I met with, what have they seen in terms of Glock switches, what we often call machine gun conversion devices. There was very few evidence of it in the district. There were some chiefs that hadn't experienced it at all and weren't even sure what it was. And at this point in time, we are picking them up. Our chiefs are picking them up, our police officers, all the time, every single day. It's a priority for us in terms of what we prosecute because they are so dangerous. They take a semi-automatic firearm and turn it into a machine gun capable of firing, up to 1,000 rounds a minute. Extremely dangerous.
Yeah, frightening. According to the Drug Enforcement Administration, fentanyl is the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. In the calendar year of 2023, the agency seized more than 77 million fentanyl pills and some 12,000 pounds of fentanyl powder. This is the most fentanyl seized by the DEA in a single year. It amounts to more than 386 million deadly doses, enough to kill every American. West Michigan not immune to the crisis, and it was one of the top priorities for U.S. Attorney Mark Totten.
It matters to every parent. It matters to everyone who has a loved one who might be exposed to these potential drugs.
You were able to expose drug traffickers. You talked a little bit about that. You highlighted the impact of fentanyl on the streets. Is that situation as bad as it seems? And I guess, how do you disrupt that supply chain?
So what we have seen in this particular landscape of illegal drugs, the predominant characteristic has been the sheer number of people dying. In the last few years, we have seen the highest numbers ever recorded, approximately 108,000 people nationally. Now, the sliver of good news we have right now is that in recent months, we have seen those numbers start to drop. I think the experts are still trying to figure out why that's happening. I think at least a part of it has been the role that the Department of Justice has played to try to do what you just said, try to dismantle those regional level supply lines that are bringing these poisons into our community. But as I've often said, we will never prosecute our way out of this problem. It is a all hands on deck solution that's required here, and we're just a part of it.
Is it a border problem? Is it a China problem? I guess, how do you stem the tide, the flow of fentanyl into the country?
There are many different points where we need to be we need to be pressing. Certainly one of them is what you said. This is a synthetic drug. It's not naturally made. It doesn't depend upon an agricultural season. It can be, the only limit is the raw ingredients to make it. The raw ingredients are coming from China, other places, India, and they are being sent to Mexico where it's being manufactured and then brought illegally across the border. And so that's certainly part of it. There's a lot of other pieces as well.
Another one of your successes came when you were able to expose child predators and these online extortion schemes. I'm thinking of the awful tragedy of Jordan DeMay of Marquette. The dark web is indeed a dark place. Talk a little bit about that particular case.
It's some of the most tragic and at the same time most important and most fulfilling work we do is taking on crimes against children. In part just because the victims here are so vulnerable. You mentioned the case involving the death of Jordan DeMay from Marquette, Michigan, 17-year-old high school student, victim of a sextortion scam that was being run out of Nigeria.
He then turned to extort Jordan DeMay for money, threatening to reveal the image to Jordan's family and friends if he did not comply.
We, working closely with the FBI, who were fantastic on this work, we successfully extradited 2 defendants. They are now convicted and sentenced, serving long sentences. It was the first successful extradition from Nigeria of those involved in a sextortion scheme. And I think this case has really done 2 things. First of all, nationally, I think it has been really the leading story, sparking a conversation about this threat and how people can protect themselves. And then I think the investigation and the prosecution of the case really set a benchmark for how we go about as law enforcement trying to address this scourge, which puts every single child who has a cell phone, connects them potentially with criminal networks around the world. It really is quite sobering.
What an astonishing criminal investigation, though, as you mentioned, to be able to bring these people from Nigeria to the U.S. to face justice. That rarely happens.
It does, yeah. I mean, you're right. It's extraditing a defendant and then securing a conviction is not an easy path. And like I said, in terms of sextortion, and not all of them, but so many of these schemes are being run out of Nigeria, it had never been done before. And, you know, it was the very hard, smart, and relentless work of the FBI that brought those defendants to the United States to face justice.
You also shined a spotlight on some of the most disturbing crimes out there, violence against women. This is another disturbing trend that seems to be only getting worse as time goes on.
Yeah, you know, the vast majority of cases in the United States, criminal cases, get prosecuted at the state and county level, but we're trying to do our part in that space as well, in part because, you know, so often these abusers escape justice. You know, you can understandably, the victims often don't want to participate in the prosecution. And so what we can do is where there are abusers that have firearms charges, we can bring those charges with the heftier penalties we have in the federal side, and never have to deal with the domestic abuse side, never have to bring witnesses. We can simply find violations on the firearms side. And so we've tried to do that. There was a guy out of Muskegon named Mitchell Pierce who was threatening to torture and kill his ex-wife, stalking her. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. A guy named Alexander Dominic out of Grand Rapids here who had a history of beating up and abusing his girlfriends in the past, and we were able to bring that case as well. That's been a real priority for us.
I assume that when the cases finally reach your desk, you're in that mode of prosecuting the crime. It's already happened. But from your standpoint, what inroads need to be made, I guess, as far as prevention goes, from stopping these crimes from happening in the first place?
Yeah. So, as you said, when we bring a case, we're holding somebody accountable. We're reacting to something that happened. What I want to do, what our law enforcement partners always want to do, is prevent these crimes from happening in the first place. You know, some crimes are harder to prevent than others, but there are a number of crimes that the public faces that public education can really make a difference. I think about sextortion. We were just talking about as one of those. I also think about many of the consumer scams, which so often target our senior citizens. Just helping to educate people about the threats out there, about the techniques that these criminals use, about efforts they can take to protect themselves can make a real difference, and it's been a priority for my team and I. When we have a case, yes, to hold that offender accountable, but then to try to use that case to educate the much wider audience about how they can avoid those types of very dangerous situations.
Public corruption and dubious politicians are as old as the Republic, which brings us to former Michigan Speaker of the House, Rick Johnson. The powerful Republican became a lobbyist and ultimately chair of a marijuana licensing board, but he was taking bribes, more than $100,000 worth. It was a case prosecuted by Mark Totten. You were part of that high-profile public corruption case involving the former Speaker of the House, Rick Johnson, charging him with bribery in 2023. Were you hoping to send a message with that case?
I do think that case sent a message, and yes, I wanted to.
Moving forward, I want to be crystal clear. My office, working closely with FBI Michigan, will place the highest priority on our work to prosecute public corruption cases at the local, state, and federal level, wherever we may find them.
Public corruption in our democracy is unacceptable. You know, public corruption is a staple in authoritarian regimes. It's almost kind of expected. People are used to it, but not in a healthy, functioning democracy. It's a poison. And so, you know, in that case, Rick Johnson was bringing in bribes hand over fist, and we were able to build that case and not only prosecute him, but 3 other people who were part of that operation as well. And you know, I hope that case sends a very strong message to everyone watching that if you have the privilege to serve in public office or to be appointed to a position where you are serving the public, you have a heightened moral, ethical, legal responsibility to steward the money, the resources, the power that you've been given. And I think that case did that.
We heard that in some of your comments after that conviction. Was that one of the more audacious episodes in your career?
You know, I think the behavior we saw there was quite blatant. It was, you know, once it was discovered, it appears that Rick Johnson came into that office intent on using it to get bribes. And, you know, I think our team really leaned into that case and, you know, moved with the care we always move. We don't bring cases unless we are convinced that we can prove every element of those crimes beyond a reasonable doubt, including in front of a jury if we have to. In this case, we didn't. We presented the evidence, and I think it became very clear to the defendants that we had everything we needed to make our case. They pled guilty, and we secured sentences that I think, you know, held these offenders accountable.
When we look at the rule of law as a broad topic, give us a sense of the vital signs when it comes. I'm thinking about January 6th, possible pardons, and on the flip side, someone like Luigi Mangione, who's drawing sympathy for allegedly assassinating a CEO. The rule of law as it pertains to this country, is it in a critical state? Is it being respected?
Let me speak generally about that. Upholding the rule of law is actually directly part of our mission statement. Our mission in the Department of Justice and our office is to uphold the rule of law, to keep the district safe, and to protect civil rights. And the way we carry out that first part of our mission, upholding the rule of law, in significant part is how we conduct ourselves, and doing so by following the norms of independence and impartiality, following the evidence wherever it leads without fear or favor. And I can tell you, having served in this office, having seen both the lawyers, the support staff in my office, and then getting a glimpse into the much wider Department of Justice, that those norms are deeply, deeply embedded in the people who carry out the work of the Department of Justice. I think it has been that way for a long time. These traditions stretch back deep in time, and I think it's critical for a healthy, functioning democracy.
As you look back on your tenure, what are you most proud of?
You know, I think the work that we have done to protect children against crimes is just especially fulfilling. Again, it is some of the most tragic cases that we see, and yet these victims just could not be more vulnerable. Some of them are 2-year-olds, right? And you know, it's incumbent upon us to be their voice, to be the ones who secure justice for people who have no ability to protect themselves. And so the work we've done against sextortion, against the production of child pornography, the conviction of Rashad Trice, who kidnapped and strangled Winter Cole Smith, that 2-year-old from Lansing, dumped her in an alley in Detroit. That kind of work protecting kids has been especially fulfilling.
Was there one that got away?
You know, I think I would welcome more time in this office. You know, me stepping down is what happens every 48 years, and so this is to be expected. There's nothing unusual here, but you know, there's an extraordinary amount still to do. And I'll just say, you know, my focus is really just being grateful for the work we've done and making sure that I'm leaving the office as strong as possible for the next person.
You've written a book. You've taught at a university. You have run for office. What's next?
I am first going to take some time off with my family. I have spent the last 6-7 years in public service. I have loved every minute of it, even though it has been incredibly challenging at moments. But I'm ready to take a little bit of a break, and I think as I do so, figure out what's next.
And your advice, I guess, for the individual who will be assuming that role for you when you leave office?
You know, I would just say that carrying out the work with independence and impartiality couldn't be more important. The public has to have confidence in what we're doing, and it needs to play out in our cases. And again, I think that has been the hallmark of the Department of Justice across Republican and Democratic administrations for many, many years. And it's critical for the health of our democracy.
Mark Totten, after a couple of years plus at the helm of the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Western Michigan, thank you for your service, and we appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.
Good luck to you.
Yep.
That's our program for this week. Join us next time for To The Point.